In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. 10,000 years of endless conflict have led to this moment. At the twilight of the 41st millennium, the fate of the galaxy will be decided upon a single blighted world. At the edge of the Eye of Terror, at the very gates of the warp, stands Cadia, the bulwark that has held chaos back for so many years. At the height of the 13th Black Crusade, Abaddon the Despoiler returns with fleets beyond counting and weapons forged to end worlds. It is the greatest conflict to afflict the stars since the Horus Heresy. Castles fall, fleets burn, worlds go dark. Against the tide of chaos, Ursarkar Creed stands defiant and unbroken. From the lips of every serviceman and space marine, a cry echoes against the coming darkness: Cadia will stand. Now, while this stuff didn't happen in our timeline, maybe we should make it happen. First off, we'll need to work out how to build all the gear. And we've got exactly the channel to explore that as our sponsor today. It's Fable Fabric. It's a young YouTube channel with a big mission: to create fantasy weapons, armors, outfits, and items in real life. They'll show you how it's done and talk about the role of the crafted piece in both the original fantasy setting and in the real-life history that inspires such creations. Check out their recent project to create Jon Snow's armor from Game of Thrones in precise detail, from forging the plates to weaving the lining to sculpting the ornate decorations. We'll put a link to that video and their channel in the description and pinned comment. So go subscribe to Fable Fabric and leave them a comment telling them what fantasy outfit, weapon or item you want them to make in real life next. A guardsman's armor perhaps, they can probably handle it. After days of bloody conflict, Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade was nearing the Cadian system. Despite heroic Imperial efforts and even many unforeseen triumphs, the tide of chaos inched ever forward. Ursarkar Creed and the indomitable warriors of humanity had so far prevented the total collapse of Imperial lines. Even so, every battle waged saw them push back, one world at a time. Soon there would be nowhere to run but to Cadia herself. Slowly but surely, Abaddon was strangling the life out of Segmentum Obscurus, patiently waiting to land the killing blow. The defenders were hard-pressed to meet every challenge. Like the mythical Hydra, Ezekiel's forces sprouted new heads when one was cut down. Ursarkar's spy ships soon spotted the newest threat as it revealed itself. Emerging suddenly over Makaria in the Cadian system, the Planet Killer made its second appearance of the war. After suffering heavy damage at the hands of the Honor Company over Lorthox, the ship had evidently been repaired and refitted. Now she was ready to reap her revenge upon the Emperor's faithful. The planet was swiftly destroyed, alongside its millions of inhabitants and garrison troops. The sanctity of the Cadian system had finally been breached, and the gauntlet thrown at the feet of its remaining defenders. Soon, vowed the heretics, Cadia would meet the same fate. This lethal threat at their very doorstep sent shockwaves among Cadian High Command. Creed and his men had long abandoned any hopes of a swift, clean victory, but this was different. Like previous legendary struggles, such as the Great Heresy or the Wars of Armageddon, this war would be a bloody struggle against total extinction. The best the Imperials could hope for was to merely survive in the ashes of Abaddon's ambition. All efforts and military priorities were rediverted. The plan was now as simple as the vicissitudes of war could allow: protect Cadia at all costs. After the terrible treason of the Volscani cataphracts, the fastness of the fortress world had been compromised. Throughout the months following the slaughter of the Tyrok fields, an unprecedented wave of chaos had spread over the planet. Though long inured to the corrupting effects of the warp, the Cadians were certainly not immune to them. As such, vast heretic and mutant hordes had sprung, wreaking havoc across the planet. Creed had stabilized the situation upon assuming command, but battles and skirmishes still raged on the surface. Salvation eventually came on pinions of fire when the Imperial fists descended upon Cadia. Nearly half the chapter's strength purged the world of its most pressing threats. Afterwards, the Sons of Dawn deployed across the sector, lending their unparalleled defensive skills to every world in need. In record time, every breached bastion was shored up and made stronger than before. Every weakness was turned into a kill zone, and every kill zone was made to look like a weakness. Diligently following the decrees of their Primarch, the Fists vowed to make the traitors pay for every inch of ground with blood and gene seed. It was clear to General Creed that he had entered the final phase of the 13th Black Crusade. Though it would be fought across multiple regions in Segmentum Obscurus, the hammerstroke would fall hardest on Cadia herself. Soon he was proven all too correct. From the folds of the Immaterium, at the edge of the Cadian sector, a vast Chaos Armada appeared. Though the Warmaster himself was nowhere to be seen, the numbers arrayed against them left the Loyalists with no doubt. This would be the fight of their lives. Battle after battle, siege after siege, the bastions and fortresses of Cadia fell one after the other. Countless Imperial heroes, mortal and transhuman alike, gave their lives for scraps of ground, even as war made them barren and poisoned. The Lord Castellan had given orders to adopt the same flexible defense that had so vexed the Warmaster at the start of the Crusade. Every Kasr in the sector had been designed for such a war. Like a mighty breakwater meant to dispel the force of waves, they had been built to slow down the enemy. For every wall taken, another one stood behind it. Every bastion held tunnels or runways for its garrison to relocate. Every street and every corner held a trap or an ambush. The traitors were presented with a nightmare of redundant defenses, and a foe that moved like the wind from one stronghold to the next. Yet despite their home field advantage, and even the expertise of the Imperial fists, the defenders were simply delaying the inevitable. Soon, Creed had been pushed back to Gehr. Sensing an opportunity, the traitors pressed their advantage, hoping to slaughter the massed Imperials before they could slip away once again. Nothing was spared in this effort. Presaged by a terrible psychic scream, the traitors attacked. Chaos Titans and Knights, alongside heretic hordes and disciplined Astartes, hurled themselves against the walls. Despite heavy Imperial resistance, the traitor throngs showed no sign of stopping. The Imperial defense was spearheaded by the legendary Cadian 8th. Nicknamed Creed's Own, they had been trained to the very pinnacle of human martial perfection. Under the Lord Castellan's unflinching gaze, they stood as exemplars of what the Guard was meant to be. They shrugged off the effects of the psychic attack and made the traitors pay double the cost in lives in their assault. And yet, General Creed was faced with a grim choice: die here in song and legend, or live to fight another day. Ultimately, his duty was to the Emperor and his homeworld. Although reluctant, the Lord Castellan gave the order. They were to abandon Gehr and relocate to Partox, the next line of defense upon Cadia. A fighting withdrawal was organized. Slowly peeling men from the walls, the general had to keep the enemy at bay while his forces escaped. The only way to do this was to sacrifice a rearguard. With a heavy heart, Creed gave this honor to the only regiment he knew would not fail him. Knowing full well their inevitable fate, and taking immense pride in being selected, 3,000 brave soldiers of the 8th were left behind. Their orders were to deny the forces of chaos the slaughter they sought. After hours of desperate fighting, they had bought their comrades the time they needed. As the last ships escaped the battle, survivors witnessed their doomed comrades' final moments. As the last defiant last shots were seen from low orbit, the Warmaster's hordes swept through the streets of Gehr like a flood. A few days later, those of the rearguard that had been taken alive were mutilated and sacrificed in front of Imperial lines. Courage, nobility, and honor would not be rewarded with leniency by the forces of chaos. The shaken Imperial defenders swiftly garrisoned Partox. This was it, the final line in the sand, the last stronghold. The ultimate stronghold that stood between the heretics and the fall of Holy Cadia. Here they would make their stand, before the war reached its inevitable end. Every single branch of the Emperor's vast armies had gathered here for this fight. From the pious Adeptus Sororitas to the grim and brooding Grey Knights. From the rapturous priests of the Ecclesiarchy to the stoic agents of the Inquisition. From the trembling mortals of the Guard to the inhumanly calm Tagmata of the Omnissiah. Even so, every warrior knew in their heart they were vastly outnumbered. As the countless legions of chaos descended upon the planet, the defenders made ready. Guardsmen of innumerable different regiments looked up to Astartes of countless different chapters. If they were to fall, at least they would die next to the Emperor's angels, safe in the knowledge that they gave their lives for his realm. Survivors of the battle claimed that every square inch of ground around the Kasr was filled with foes. A veritable sea of chaos, rippling with malice and corruption, had come for their souls. The battle that followed was the bloodiest of the conflict so far. Creed made use of every artifice at his considerable disposal to stay the tide. Yet despite his best efforts, and those of his men, Partox was doomed to fall. Soon the walls were being breached one after the next. Void shields were failing, traps were being depleted, entire regiments were dying. Abaddon's hordes were hurling themselves at the defenders with no thought spared for their own lives. Baying their devotion to the gods from ravaged throats, they kept coming even as the loyalists were tearing them to pieces. There was simply nothing in front of the heretics that terrified them nearly as much as what stood at their back. After a long struggle, General Creed was once again forced to order a costly retreat. The bulk of his forces were to abandon the stronghold and make for the Cadia Sea. There, they would be extracted and relocated to further fronts. The traitors, however, had gotten wise to Creed's tactics. This withdrawal would be far more costly than the last. From the minute the garrison fell back, they were hounded by all the horrors of the warp. To make matters worse, a significant portion of Cadian leadership had perished during the defense. It took all of Creed's skill to prevent the retreat from turning into a rout. Here was an opportunity for the heretics to avenge themselves of all their losses. The ground between Partox and the Cadia port was soon littered with loyalist corpses. Only thanks to the actions of a few brave souls and the enemy's uncontrollable bloodlust did the Imperial host survive. Indeed, despite their master's urgings to maintain the pursuit, thousands of traitors indulged in their worst excesses. They fell upon the Imperial dead, desecrating their corpses and allowing many of the living to make their escape. Meanwhile, the rearguard at the port was bravely held by the Subjugators chapter and thousands of Ministorum preachers. The Subjugators were one of the youngest chapters of the Imperium, founded in the 41st millennium. Their dedication, however, was worthy of a founding legion. Despite having been brought to the brink of extinction, they did not hesitate to volunteer for this duty. As for the Ecclesiarchy preachers, they brought everlasting honor to an organization so often plagued by corruption and false piety. As the rearguard held the line, the remaining loyalist forces were ferried across the sea. Much of their heavy equipment had to be left behind, but the army was mostly intact. Soon it was redeployed across the planet, where they vowed to fight to the last. The forces of chaos pressed their advantage. Every space-worthy craft at their disposal was thrown against Cadia. Now that the ground forces were in disarray, the opportunity had finally come to crush that hated planet once and for all. As Creed was still organizing things on the surface, Admiral Conan led the battle in the void. The Imperial fleet was ordered to hold at all costs. If Conan failed, Cadia would be lost. A massive space battle took place in the stars, as the disorganized defenders on the surface looked on in horror. Conan showed once again his skills and zeal. Imperials and heretics tore each other apart in an apocalyptic shower of ordnance. After what seemed like an eternity, a high-priority message was sent to General Creed. Anxiously awaiting news of the outcome, every officer listened to the report with bated breath. An exhausted and shell-shocked Admiral Conan reported that the vast majority of his fleet had been annihilated. The enemy, however, had been pushed back. Cheers erupted from every man in the room. Further reports soon confirmed Conan's story. The enemy fleet was in full retreat. Cadia had been saved. Creed, however, did not share his men's elation. The Cadian system lay in ruin, its worlds a smouldering carcass, where corruption ran rampant. Furthermore, the general had a hard time believing that the War Master would not appear in person to make an attempt. The Chaos Army that had invaded the sector had almost claimed Cadia, but Creed had a sickening feeling they had only dealt with the vanguard of the War Master's forces. The cheers and jubilation were abruptly cut off. Now was not the time for celebration, but for planning. What few precious days of respite this Pyrrhic victory had afforded them needed to be used wisely. The Lord Castellan issued at once new sets of orders. What few ships remained were ordered to scout the rim of the system for Abaddon's personal fleet. Sooner or later, the general believed he would appear. The Cadian Kasrs were repaired and reinforced by the Adeptus Mechanicus, including the infamous Belisarius Call. High command was relocated to Kasr, the largest of Cadia's fortresses. Located on the Elysian Fields, and surrounded by many enigmatic pylons that dotted the planet, it would serve as Creed's headquarters. every Space Marine chapter serving in the Crusade rushed to the planet to reinforce it. A roster of legendary warriors was soon gathered, including the Space Wolves, the Dark Angels, the Black Templars, and the Imperial Fists. The countless military regiments were put to a grueling training regimen, hardening them for the battle to come. Finally, the Castellan attempted to send a desperate cry for help to anyone who could still hear. Though the warp had claimed most Imperial astropaths, a desperate creed created an ad hoc choir out of sanctioned psychers. Though doomed to an eternity of torment, their sacrifice might just bring salvation to their brethren. All perished, but the message was sent across the stars, hoping against hope that someone might listen. Against all odds, and perhaps thanks to the Emperor's intervention, this missive was heard. Across the vastness of the galaxy, the Phalanx answered the call. The massive Imperial Fists vessel, under the leadership of Tor Garadin, had recently repulsed a massive Chaos attack. Most of the Fists were away, fighting across the stars, including on Cadia. Warsmith Shon II of the Iron Warriors and the Demon Prince Be'lakor sought to take advantage of the situation. As such, the attack found the Phalanx severely undermanned, with barely 30 veterans aboard. Much of the vessel had been taken and corrupted by the enemy, forcing its meager garrison to drastic actions. Tor Garadin ordered the vessel to fire upon itself, scouring a full tenth of its decks. At the climax of the battle, the few remaining defenders were joined by the Legion of the Damned, and the heretics were expunged. Now the behemothhic space station was badly mauled and barely garrisoned. Yet upon receiving Creed's message, Tor Garadin did not hesitate. Crippled or not, the captain vowed that the Phalanx would serve in the coming battle for Cadia. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, another less savory character was also making his way toward the planet. From the vastness of his grotesque museum, Trazyn the Infinite was setting forth. Though a being like him could not have cared less for the affairs of most mortals, he had received a message of his own, one he could not ignore. From inside the halls of his collection, the bell of Saint Gestal had suddenly started to chime. The Necron Lord had stolen the holy relic from the Imperium long ago, during a previous Black Crusade. It had sat dormant for millennia on Solomus. Yet now, as Abaddon unleashed his wrath, it rang for 13 terrible times. Each chime brought untold devastation to Trazyn's priceless collection. With each echo, centuries of history and stolen relics were lost. At his wit's end, the Necron Lord threw the accursed bell into the webway, in the petty hope it might plague the Eldar as much as it had him. Standing in the ruins of his life's work, Trazyn finally decided to witness this 13th Black Crusade for himself. Heroes and villains were thus answering the Lord Castellan's call, though their arrival might well come too late. A few days after the Imperial victory, alarms blared across Cadia. A desperate vox call reached General Creed. From the garbled screams of pain and terror, a chilling message rang. The remnants of the Imperial fleet had been destroyed. Admiral Quarren was dead. The War Master had come for Cadia. In our next episode on the Black Crusades, the Siege of Cadia will reach its climax. So make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.